Το επόμενο μας θέμα έχει να κάνει με την παρουσίαση του βιβλίου της Dr. Dianna Markides με τίτλο Sendall in Cyprus, 1892 to 1898, a governor in Bondage, που πραγματοποιήθηκε στο Hellenic Centre στις 24 Απριλίου. Η παρουσίαση έγινε από τον Professor Robert Holland από το King's College London. Εδώ να σας αναφέρουμε ότι οι ομιλίες έγιναν στα αγγλικά. Εμείς πρώτα θα περάσουμε να παρακολουθήσουμε ένα απόσπασμα από την ομιλία του Professor Robert Holland.
At least as much about seeing and hearing the author as it is about the book itself. And so I think it's right I should say something about Dianna Markides, even though, of course, some of you know her very well and some of you know of her, but not everybody. And it's particularly appropriate to do so, I think, because Dianna is in a rather special sense Anglo-Cypriot. I should stand still, shouldn't I? She is Anglo in origin and provenance, as we're about to say, and sort of in style, I think, as well. But profoundly Cypriot, I think, also by long experience. Now, Diana's father, if I get the full names right, Bertram John Weston, first arrived in Cyprus in 1931, maybe late 1930, I'm a bit sure about the exact date. But just in time, ironically, for photos of the Octobriana upsurge later in that year, in October 1931, to appear in the Western family album. At a time when the colonial administrative service, back in those days, was increasing its professional and technical staff, he was appointed, in fact, as a horticulturalist, and specifically as a citrus expert. And indeed, he was trained in South Africa. John Weston's own father, Diana's grandfather, had been head gardener at Chatsworth. So planting, horticulture was presumably in the blood. And indeed, to digress slightly, the Chatsworth-based Duke of Devonshire had been Secretary for State for the colonies in the mid-1920s. And the suspicion is that the Duke may well have played a role in encouraging the head gardener's newly married young son to head east young man. Anyway, Cyprus via Chatsworth seems to have been the fate of the Western family. Later on, Diana's father, I think uniquely in the history of the colonial government of Cyprus, served as commissioner in every district up until 1960. And indeed on Sunday, 1st of March, 1959, he was the first government official designated to board the plane from Athens and welcome Archbishop Makarios back home after his exile. This perhaps says something too about the local Cypriot appreciation of Diana's father. He had a particular affection, I think it's true to say, for Famagusta, and one German scholar, writing about B.J. Weston and Famagusta, this is on the web, and I don't know if Diana's seen it, refers to her father's vision of Cyprus as a Switzerland of the Eastern Mediterranean. And the conclusion by this scholar is that this vision was outdated by the 1950s, but I would guess that for many, the ideal, or some variant thereof, would be rather attractive, would it not, in the 21st century. But I hope it's so, a few minutes wasted, or not wasted, spent in sketching the family background, but I think it's relevant to what we'll be discussing later on. Diana was therefore brought up, partly, in the island during the 1950s. And some of her friends at that time are here tonight. The first years of independent Cyprus, she was mostly in London and that other rowdy territory, Scotland, but returned in 1967, married Sophocles Markides, St Andrews trained, and to this day, when not in Cyprus, can often be found roaming the glens. And she was soon working with the Swedish contingent of Umfisip. She was an originator of the British Residence for Justice in Cyprus organisation after 1974, and was a leading light in what became its subsequent offshoot, the Women's Walk Home movement. Again, some people involved in that are here tonight, active on and on, off and on, through to the later 80s.
Στη συνέχεια το λόγο έλαβε η συγγραφέας του βιβλίου, Dr. Dianna Markides, η οποία έκανε ομιλία σχετικά με το βιβλίο της. Ας παρακολουθήσουμε ένα απόσπασμα από την ομιλία της.
Thank you very much, Rob, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book too, but also how I came to write it. I think, though, first I should thank the Hellenic Centre. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. I'd like to thank the Hellenic Centre for providing us with such a warm and hospitable venue. And most particularly, I'd like to thank its director, Agathi Kalispera, for making all the arrangements, especially for the glasses of wine that we're all going to enjoy at the end, I believe. I'm, of course, extremely privileged to have anyone as distinguished an authority as Professor Holland presenting the book here. He's already touched on the fact that we've worked very closely on the subject of broader Anglo-Greek relations, and of course you can't do that without working on Anglo-Turkish relations as well. The two are inextricably intertwined, especially when it comes to Cyprus. So it seems most appropriate to me that he should be introducing you to this work of mine on the extraordinary relations between one particular British governor and the Cypriots, a vignette, if you like, of the 1890s in Cyprus. Rob has also touched on the fact that I met him when he was writing what has for many years now been the seminal authority on the subject of Britain and the revolt in Cyprus in the 1950s, and he has in fact been my mentor only regarding historiography ever since. So, how did I come to write this book? In fact, it was Rob Holland's colleague, Peter Lyon, who warned me years ago that in order to get right round a subject, in order to understand the broader picture, chronologically, regionally, you first have to get right inside it. And that if you don't, you're liable to oversimplify and draw inaccurate conclusions, and this happens more often than not. So I've always followed this advice. It can take rather longer to produce a book, but it's worth getting right inside it so that you understand the broader picture better. And this is what I was doing, getting right inside the bigger subject of the tribute that Rob has already mentioned, when I became so struck with the Sendall years, the last decade of the 19th century, years which had actually hardly been touched in Cypriot historiography. It's a very important story, I think, and that nobody knew much about. So I decided it was worth a book on its own, and here it is. Sir Walter Joseph Sendall was the fourth High Commissioner of Cyprus. They were called High Commissioners as long as Cyprus was a province of the Ottoman Empire. And I've been aware of him for many years, actually, and found him intriguing. I first came across him when working on Nicosia during British rule, a very long time ago. He'd been referred to by one or two local historians as taking an interest in local education, but that was about it. Then, in the entrance to Phaneromeni Girls' School, if I can find the right button, I found this. This isn't a very good slide, but it gives you an idea. Phaneromeni Girls' School is in the heart of Old Nicosia, and this is an inscription to Sir Walter Sendall, a great High Commissioner of Cyprus and a great friend of learning. There it was, in a Greek school which was at the heart of the anti-colonial struggle at the end of British rule. After some inquiry, I discovered that this modern plaque had replaced an older dedication that had disappeared during the 1950s, not being politically correct. Then, some years later, whiling away the time in the National Portrait Gallery, I came across this, right in the middle of room 23, Expansion and Empire. There he was, in the middle of the room, an imposing bust by Edward Lantery of Sir Walter Sendall. He'd not only distinguished himself in Cyprus, but in Ceylon and the West Indies, and it was from the West Indies that this bust derived. The book has been described as a biography, and that's how Rob described it a little while ago, but it definitely is not only about a colonial governor. It's as much about Cypriots, these Cypriots, and these Cypriots, and problems they had during those years, and how they were tackled in an unusually close collaboration between governor and governed. And that's what's really special about Sendall, the way he collaborated with the Cypriots. But this collaboration is epitomised in 1897 by an extraordinary event that Rob was already referred to. The Legislative Council, a colonial semi-elected legislature, usually met here in the Secretariat, the hub of the colonial government. And there was not without this particular venue was not without its symbolism. There was an element of control. The government was all around. But in 1897, they met, as you've already heard, right up here, high in the Paphos forest, in the monastery of the Abbot of Kiko, the Abbot of Kiko being one of the elected members of the Legislative Council. It was a unique event, never happened again. But to find out why it happened and how it happened, you have to read the book. So these and other contemporary photographs are beautifully presented in the book, thanks to the skill and determination of our graphic designer, who is Marcia Dulles, who's in Cyprus, so she's not with us tonight. But contemporary photographs of that period are few and far between. But I was lucky enough to have Thelma Blatchford as a friend and a proofreader. She and I go back a long way, and she's been working with me on texts for years. But this time, she's done much more. Her wonderful drawings, which you'll see when you read the book. When we couldn't find a contemporary photograph of a building that came into the story, she'd pick up her sketch pad, go off to the building and draw it, or draw an impression of it. And this is the government printing office, which is opposite the Secretariat. It's built in 1896. Actually, it's being restored at the moment, so it might never look quite like that again.